mentioned earlier that I served at 30 Squadron in Cape Town, and our secondary role was in support of the MV Agulhas to resupply Antarctica and the islands. On a specific voyage in 1985, we were anchored off the island of Gough Island. It's a British island. However, we have a set of meteorologists that are based there all year round and are relieved once a year, and they serve a very important role. I'm sure most people realize that our weather systems, frontal systems, originate in the central Atlantic and then move towards our coast across the country and then play themselves out in the Indian Ocean. So there are the two stations, one at Gough Island, so they're able to track the intensity of the storm so that by the time it reaches our shores, the meteorologists have a pretty good idea of what to expect in the storm and then see how it plays out, and then eventually it's measured again when it crosses the Prince Edward Islands at Marion Island. We were on board the ship at the time, and they were going through the normal processes of discharging diesel fuel to the island. And unfortunately, the wind was blowing very strongly, and the captain realized that the hose was getting fairly close to his propeller system. He activated the bow thrusters, which is a midships control system that would move the ship left or right. And unfortunately, when moving the ship to the one side, the suction caused this hydraulic hose to become entangled around the propeller. We were stuck, and fortunately I had my social diving gear called scuba, self-contained breathing apparatus on board, and the captain approached me to see if I could possibly dive and see if I could untangle the canvas hose. Contrary to safety regulations, one should never dive alone, but I was the only one there with diving cylinders, so my colleague floated above the water to try and give me top cover as such, and I went down to see whether this was possible. Upon exhaustion of the compressed air in my cylinder, I was suffering badly from hypothermia, but the hose had still got the better of me. That evening, we had a discussion with the engineers, and we were able to modify the firefighting cylinders to be able to accommodate our self-breathing apparatus, which is a totally different system to the firefighting system. The next morning, having recovered from hypothermia, I went down again, and we tried a different approach, and fortunately, just before I'd exhausted the fuel and very close to hypothermia, we got the hose untangled. Now, the implications of that were twofold. Had we not got the hose off, there was a possibility that the ship would have to be towed back to Cape Town at exorbitant cost, and possibly delays because it would have to go into dry dock to have the repairs done. Or secondly, if it steamed back under its own steam, it would definitely have had to have undergone some form of major maintenance in the dry dock, and this would have possibly not allowed the ship to do the annual Christmas changeover of personnel and resupplies in Antarctica. So I'm sure there would have been an alternative, but I would hate to have thought or to think what the implications would have been if we hadn't been able to get the hose untangled. And for that episode, I was awarded the Southern Cross Medal.
Right. Thank you, Colonel. Shall you now inform the Commission about the commendation medal that was awarded to you?
Mr. Chair, the two awards I'm going to allude to now changed names over the time. I was initially awarded the Chief of the South African National Defence Force Commendation Medal, which is awarded to all ranks of the SANDF for service of a high order. That was in 1992. The name of this medal has subsequently changed, and it is now known as the Military Medal Merit. I say again, Military Merit Medal. And when they changed the name, you are allowed to include the MMM behind your name as part of your title. I was lucky enough again to be considered for a re-award of this medal. At this stage it was known as the Military Merit Medal, and instead of awarding a second medal, I was awarded a bar to my medal. So I'm extremely lucky to have the medal and bar.
Colonel, will you please explain as to what is meant by a service of a high order?
Mr. Chair, in my opinion, this would be service rendered over and above it is what is expected of an average to above average individual.
Right, thank you. Will you then please inform the Commission about the Pro Patria medal that was awarded to you?
Mr. Chair, the Pro Patria medal is awarded to SANDF members serving in the operational area of the former Southwest Africa.
And the Southern Africa medal?
The Southern Africa medal is awarded to SANDF personnel participating in operations outside of South Africa and Namibia from the 1st of April 76 and before March 1990.
And the final medal, the General Service Medal, will you please inform the Commission about that medal?
This, contrary to the Southern African medal, which is for services outside of the borders of South Africa, the General Service Medal is awarded to members participating in internal military operations, and I was awarded the award for that.
Thank you, Colonel. Shall we then proceed to page 14 of Bundle I? In page 14, we have information on the awards that were awarded to your good self. Shall you first then should I proceed, Chair? Thank you. Will you then inform us about the Atlas Chairman's Outstanding Performance Award?
Mr. Chairman, Atlas was the Atlas Aircraft Corporation, which is now part of the Denel Group. And at that stage, they were the prime contractor for the industrialization, development, and build of the Oryx medium transport helicopter. And they have an annual award known as the Atlas Chairman's Award for Outstanding Performance. And I was lucky enough to be awarded this for my achievements on the Oryx program in 1989.
Colonel, will you please just give us more detail on this outstanding performance relating to the oryx, for which you were then awarded an award?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is it for the Armscore Award or the Atlas Award?
Thank you. I'm still on the Atlas Award, because you just indicate that you received this award because of your outstanding performance in respect of the oryx. Now, will you give us some more detail as to what that related to in particular?
Mr. Chair, we have to go back and realize that the country was under embargoes and sanctions at the time, and the military desperately needed an upgrade to the oryx medium transport capability. Hence the identification of the oryx medium transport helicopter. In order to ensure that we were able to build the 50 helicopters that were specified, a lot of back engineering had to be done, and the processes that were followed to industrialize major components like the engines, the gearboxes, the blades, both main and tail rotor blades, the fuel tanks, the windshields, the armor-plated seats, as well as a large portion of the avionics suite, were all parts of the requirement addressed under the oryx program, and I was the project officer for that, coordinating all these activities.
The oryx, was it the product of South Africa?
Mr. Chair, the engineering portion was predominantly South African, and major parts of the components were manufactured locally. However, some of the components like the airframe and the undercarriage were acquired, if I may use the word.
Is it correct that South Africa had acquired the license to manufacture some of the components of the oryx?
Unfortunately, that could not happen at the time. We were under sanctions, and no one was prepared to give us the manufacturing rights, and that's why I mentioned there was a lot of back engineering that had to be done in order to industrialize these components. So the achievements of the engineers of the time was absolutely outstanding.
Colonel, when you say you contributed towards the back engineering of this equipment, does it mean that you also contributed towards the development of the engineering of this equipment?
Mr. Chair, not being an engineer, I wasn't able to contribute towards the engineering discipline per se. However, my task was to ensure that I managed all these processes and different disciplines to ensure that we all arrived on the assembly line in time to start the production.
Thank you. Shall we then proceed to the next award that relates to the Armaments Corporation of South Africa Chairman's Award, which was awarded in 1989?
Mr. Chair, this is very similar to the Atlas Award. However, I would see it as a few notches higher, because Armscore was doing activities or carrying out activities with all the major arms contractors in South Africa. However, and to mention Atlas being one of them. So there were many more projects to be evaluated and compete against each other for this prestigious award. And I was again one of the 4 members that received this award from Armscore. There was the Armscore program manager, there was the Denel program manager, there was the foreign procurement manager, and myself, were all joint recipients of this prestigious award, which I think is possibly, and I think even still today, possibly the one of the most prestigious awards to receive in South Africa.
Right, thank you. Shall we then proceed to, will you please proceed to inform us about the Arthur Childs Award?
Mr. Arthur Childs was a Canadian that loved aviation and, fortunately for us, had a soft spot for South Africa. And he realized at the time that we had brilliant engineers, and I'm not saying that we still don't have them, but at that stage, under the trying circumstances under which they had to work, which was the embargo, made their tasks even more difficult. And he decided that he would form a trust and have an annual award called the Arthur Childs Award to a member who had contributed to the advancement of military aviation in South Africa through innovation, originality, and ingenuity in that particular year. And I was awarded for my achievements, or received that award for my achievements on the Oryx program that year, and that was in 1991. So it was an ongoing process from 89, 89, and then again, luckily, in 1991 with 3 different prestigious awards.
Thank you, Colonel. Shall you then proceed to inform the Commission about the Denel Project of the Year Award, which was awarded in 1993 or for that particular year?
Mr. Chair, if I can mention any shortfall in the Oryx per se, is the size of the cabin. It has exceptional power to weight ratio capability, and if you had to travel long distances, you would have to make sure that there were fuel tanks inside the fuselage. This would limit the cargo that you were able to carry, or the personnel, or the troops. So somehow we had to think of an alternative solution by not having the tanks inside the fuselage, and somehow they had to be outside. And it was as vague as that. We sat down and we investigated the options. Eventually we came up with a solution which they call sponson tanks, which fit on to the side of the helicopter just above the undercarriage. And in fact, the undercarriage retracts into these fuel tanks. And this extends the range of the Oryx by almost 2 hours with both sets of sponson tanks, left and right. And again, we had to back engineer because we did not have the license to manufacture these. And the composite facility owned by Denel in the Western Cape back engineered this. It was test flown, found to be successful, and we went into production, and today it is the standard fit onto the side of each Oryx in the Air Force at the moment. And for that, I was awarded the Denel Project of the Year.
So this award relates to your contribution to the improvement on the capabilities of the Oryx.
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, it improved the operational capability and flexibility of the Oryx by allowing the cabin to be unobstructed with fuel tanks so that it could be utilized for either freight, passengers, or troops. The answer to the question is yes.
Now, will you then please inform the Commission about the South African Air Force Command Council Honorable Commendation?
When this was awarded, the sanctions had been lifted, and it was now 1996. And I also mentioned earlier that it was the Air Force's responsibility to supply helicopters and crew for the MV Agulhas to carry out her tasks. And as I mentioned earlier, that the Puma helicopters that were bought by the Department of Environmental Affairs were not completely incapable, but they were lacking, is the better word, in their performance to carry out the tasks when in Antarctica, because the department was building a new base in the mountains, which required excess power, and the Pumas were unable to give that power. And the Air Force was approached by Department of Environmental Affairs to see if an Oryx couldn't be converted to accommodate blade folding, which we had already done for the military Pumas, military Oryx, and also to incorporate a heating system into the main and tail rotor blades. And fortunately, Eurocopter had done this development for its operations in the North Sea, where they required Super Pumas to fly in icy conditions. And because the dynamics of the Oryx are similar, very similar, to the Super Puma, we acquired this technology from France, and Denel again had to back engineer it because the Oryx was unique. They couldn't take the drawings from a Super Puma because they were not compatible. And this task was carried out in an incredibly short time because we were only tasked in June the one year, and they wanted it to sail for Antarctica by December the same year. So we were under extreme pressure and in an environment that we'd never been before. But fortunately, we had Big Brother to hold our hands, and he was very supportive, and we were able to make sure that both helicopters embarked on the Agulhas in December that year. And for that, I received the South African Air Force Command Council Honorable Commendation.
Right. Thank you, Colonel. Can you just enlighten the Commission about who the Big Brother was that assisted?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, it was no longer the sanction days, and Eurocopter was able to communicate with us and supply us with components, and his engineering capability helped us tremendously to ensure that we met the timescales. I don't think the complexity would have been overwhelming to our engineers. It just meant that the time was very much against us, and Eurocopter helped us in order to meet these timescales.
Thank you, Colonel. Will you then please turn over to page 15 of the bundle and inform the Commission about the flying award that was awarded to your good self?
Mr. Chair, while I was still based at 30 Squadron in Cape Town, we had an emergency call from a ship that was off the Zululand coast that had a critically injured seaman on board. The squadron was tasked because of the range of the Super Freelon, and also its hull is built similar to the hull of a ship. So had you experienced a problem, you would be able to ditch it in the water. And because of the extreme distance that we had to travel from the shore, it wasn't deemed feasible to use a Puma from Durban. So we ferried the Freelon from Cape Town to Durban, refueled, flew as far as Richards Bay, refueled again, and then we realized that there was a tropical cyclone approaching. And we had no choice but to press on. And we flew through the storm, and fortunately, or through half the storm, because the ship was miraculously in the eye of the storm, the center of the storm. We rescued the seaman. We hoisted a doctor down. He went and stabilized the crewman. We hoisted him back, and unfortunately we then had to re-penetrate the storm, which the helicopter neither us liked very much, I must say. By the time we reached land, we'd already lost one of the engines, and for some unknown reason, we were picking up heavy vibrations on the controls. We weren't quite sure what the problem was, so we carried out an emergency landing on the beach, and just before we landed, we lost the second engine. Fortunately, the Freelon has 3 engines, so we were able to land on one. When we got out to inspect the cause of this vibration, the storm had been so severe that the coating, or the covering for the hydraulic pipes had been completely corroded away. And for that rescue, I was received the South African Air Force Good Show Award for flying abilities.
Right, thank you, Colonel. Shall we then proceed to page 16 of the bundle? Now, please inform the Commission about the paper, your paper that was presented in London in 1995.
Mr. Chair, I'm sure you'll agree that without the Oryx, this testimony would have been very short. So what happened is Denel, or at that stage it was still Atlas Aircraft Corporation, were trying to market the Oryx concept to Puma operators to give them a better hot and high operating capability. An ideal opportunity for them to market the product so that they could tell people how good it was, what was achieved on the product, and its type of performance, was to present a paper at an international helicopter conference. They applied and were successful in being received by the Shepherd Helicopter Symposium in London, and the Chief Executive Officer of Atlas Aircraft Corporation approached me to read the paper at this symposium. I did read the paper. It was extremely well received. There were numerous questions from various operators, both military and civil, all interested in the capabilities of the Oryx. It was extremely well received. However, I'm not quite sure what the reason was, but Denel was never ever successful in marketing the product.
Colonel, you say there a lot of interest that came related to the capabilities of the Oryx. In other words, your audience saw you as an authority in relation to the development of the capabilities of the Oryx, hence the interest.
Mr. Chair, I would like to think that they were more interested in the product, but I must say that the presentation was extremely well received. There were some very complex questions asked, and there was a lot of interest showed, and I was very surprised when no follow-on orders came from this marketing exercise, because the questions that were asked and the enthusiasm shown by specifically the military operators surprised me that it never reached fruition.
Colonel, on page 17 of the bundle, this just illustrates the promotion or your ascendancy within the force. In 1987, you were promoted to the rank of the Lieutenant Colonel.
Mr. Chair, that is correct. When I was offered the post of the Oryx project officer, it went hand in hand with promotion. So apart from the challenges of the project, it was also financially and career beneficial to me.
And in 2001, you were promoted to the position of the colonel, and you retained that position until you retired. And also as a reserve force member, you continue to hold that position.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. I was promoted to the rank of full colonel in 2001, and after having gone on pension, I was called back into the reserve force and fortunate enough to retain my rank in my present capacity.
On a lighter note, Colonel, you are married and you have 2 children.
I am. I'm very happily married to my wife, Charmaine. Very interestingly, when I first met her, she had an Indian passport. She was born in India, grew up in India, and cooks a fantastic curry. We have 2 children, a boy and a girl, and I'm very blessed with both of them.
Thank you, Colonel. I'm sure Charmaine would like to hear this. Shall we then proceed to the evidence that you are going to present, which is contained in from page 2 of the bundle? Mr. Chair and Commissioner Musi, the bundle that we are using is still bundle I. Are you there, Kenneth? Okay. Now, this statement or this evidence that you are going to present should be read in conjunction with the joint report on the strategic defense packages dated the 14th day of November 2001. This forms part of bundle I, and the information in the state relates to the period from when you were appointed as the user specialist officer in early 1990, then to being seconded to AMSCO, the official procurement agency of the Republic of South Africa, as the light utility helicopter project officer for the acquisition of the A109 LUH from 1999 until 2003. And to some extent, we may also lead evidence on the present situation, especially or the present status in relation to the project. Now, will you please inform the Commission about the inception of the concept of to either upgrade or replace the Alouette?
Mr. Chair, the Alouette 3 was designed by the French company called Sud Aviation, now known as Eurocopter, and it was designed in the late 50s, and the South African Air Force acquired their first Alouette 3 in 1962. So by the time I started the investigation into the possibility of upgrading or replacing the Alouette 3, they had already been in service for about 30 years. And as a previous colleague alluded to, the acquisition cycle from the first drafting of one of the documents, namely the required operational capability, until the product is brought into service, could be anything from 10 to 15 years. So we realized that we had to work in all earnest to make sure that the Alouette 3 process commenced timeously, so that we did not run into a problem by not having a light helicopter capability in the Air Force. One of the other issues that was looked at was at the time it was indicated that Aerospati or Sud Aviation, or Aerospatiale as they later became, were intending to close down the Alouette 3 production line. And this would have complicated our support lines. It would have led to long lead times and possibly extra costs. And maybe one of the options to have resolved that would have been to have bought out large quantities of spares, which the Defence Force couldn't actually afford at that stage, because if you remember, 1990 was when we underwent one of the first major financial cutbacks. So we didn't have the money or the luxury to invest in this capability. So we had to carry out the study to see whether it could be upgraded, and if not, then it had to be replaced.
Right. Thank you, Colonel. Maybe before you proceed with your evidence, may I just bring it to the attention of the Chair and Commissioner Musi that there is an Alouette chart, Alouette 3 acquisition documentation chart, which we have requested. It's page 106, but it is put on the left-hand side of your bundle. Now, this chart has conveniently been put there because it will be used as a navigation that informs you as to what the witness was doing at a particular period. As contents of this statement, those extracts that I have referred to.
Mr. Chair, that is correct. I would like to refer to the same page, 32 of the bundle, 8.2, which gives an overarching description of the roles and capabilities that the LUH would have to fulfill.
Right. Thank you, Colonel. Will you please proceed to present evidence on these papers, in particular, the user requirement statement? There is an extract that forms part of the bundle, which you can then proceed to refer the Commission to as we deal with specified and important provisions. The
operations both day and night. The helicopters shall be suitable for night vision goggles. I did mention that earlier, that I had been introduced to this earlier, so I was aware of the benefits that night vision goggles give any military, even civilians starting to use night vision goggles to enhance their night operations at the moment. The helicopter will be capable of fulfilling the basic generic helicopter tasks such as communication flights, hoisting and cargo slinging, and various operational system configurations are envisaged in order to satisfy the specific roles. Some of the equipment will be alluded to later, but it will be an infrared thermal imaging capability. It will have a searchlight and self-protection weapons, and I will allude to that in more detail later in the document. We go to, still on page 18, paragraph 12.1. The light helicopter will be used at 87 Helicopter Flying School in the basic configuration, and the reason why that is mentioned in the basic configuration is for ab initio training, ab initio being the introduction to helicopter flying, and then the helicopter will be able to accommodate specialist role equipment for the operational role and also for advanced training. So there has to be flexibility available to the helicopter so that it can be used in the basic role and in the operational role. Still on page 18, paragraph 15.1. The primary role of the SANDF is to prepare itself in order to deter any external hostilities. This has been alluded to on numerous occasions earlier. The requirement for the helicopter support in the 9 regions is about to increase. Remember, this was written in 1995. We had just announced our 9 provinces, and we believed that the humanitarian support that this helicopter could lend to the peoples of the country would be extremely beneficial to all. With the emphasis, as I mentioned, on humanitarian aid. The RSA is also going to be called upon more and more to render regional assistance, which has been mentioned before. We've operated in flood relief operations. We've supported various election initiatives, and the country has benefited tremendously from those political initiatives. Considering the role of the light helicopter is to play in the new South Africa and the region as a whole, the majority of the utilization of the helicopter would possibly be in the secondary role and not in the primary role as mentioned in the beginning of that paragraph. Still on page 18, paragraph 15.3. The LUH should be capable of assisting other arms of the service and government departments in accomplishing their tasks and or missions.
Right. Thank you, Kenneth. This study for the replacement of the Alouette 3 was undertaken in or around 1992. That was long before the adoption of the white paper or even the defense review. Now, the URS was only approved in the year 2000. Now, are you able to indicate as to whether the URS that was adopted in 2000 had some influence or element of the SDPPs in its finalization or not?
Mr. Chair, I would say that the URS was not influenced by the SDPPs. This was a requirement that was formulated and molded into the final document based on the defense review and also the white paper earlier. So the capability, regardless of what acquisition process was going to be used, would remain the same.
Right, thank you. Shall you then proceed to deal with paragraph 6 of your statement, which refers to you, or which states that in 1995 you drew and compiled a required operational capability document for the replacement of the alouette. Now, I would invite you, Colonel, to also talk about the elements or components of this ROC, required operational capabilities document, because so much has been said about the document, but I don't think by now that the Commission has been able to get it in clear terms as to how this document is developed, what would go into the document, the factors taken into consideration, and you, being the person that drew up this document, will be in a better position to can bring clarity to that.
Mr. Chair, the ROC is the first document that is written when a program is started. And this is normally known as the kickstart mechanism to initiate a program. The information that I started reading, and just go one step back, it's a very basic document that doesn't specify too many requirements. There's definitely not funding mentioned in the document. So it basically is just a document to register the requirement. The documents that follow this document are the ones where the technical information and funding is required as we go through the evolutionary process.
Will I be correct to say that the ROC is actually just an internal document that would be used within the arm of service, or does it get elevated to other fora?
Mr. Chair, I'd prefer not to go into too much detail on the process. This I'd like to leave to the specialist, Captain Jordan, who will be testifying later. However, to answer the question, the document is approved at the highest level. It used to go to the Operations Staff Council. However, to the best of my knowledge, the Chief of the Defence Force has decided that it will be approved at the Military Command Council. But I would like to hear what Captain Jordan has to say on that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think I'm right.
You mentioned in your statement, Colonel, that the problem statement highlighted the operational requirement and how the Alouette 3 was incapable of fulfilling certain operational roles. And the requirement statement detailed the performance and equipment requirement as approved by the Air Force Project Committee in November 1994. Now, does it mean that this the requirements the requirement had been pre-approved by the Air Force Project Committee in 1994? Was the document also informed by that approval of the Air Force Project Committee?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. The information that was approved was incorporated into the ROC. Otherwise, the ROC would not have had status.
Now, this document was then used to form the basis against which the Alouette 3 replacement was specified. Now, it is correct that the white paper on defense was approved in May 1996.
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Now, soon after the ROC was approved, you commenced with drafting the staff target. Can you give the Commission full information about what a staff target is? How is it developed? Mr. Chair, the staff target is contained in the bundle in pages 92 to 105. But as I have mentioned earlier on, the extracts of the relevant portions of the document have also been drawn, and they will appear in a separate page. So you'll not have to be paging from this page to that page. Will you proceed, Colonel, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The information contained in the staff target is basically most of the information contained in your user requirement statement, except that it will have finances, it will have quantities, and it would have envisaged timescales and a possible first order cash flow. Apart from that, the technical content is extracted from your URS. So if the Chair would like me to continue with an abridged version of the URS, which are the ones contained on page 18 to 21, I can continue. I believe that not all the items are relevant, so it shouldn't take too long. If I go through that, then the forum can get the idea of what should be contained in the staff target. Because the staff target is an extremely important document insofar as that before the staff target is registered, the activity is not registered as a project. And the person managing the activities is known as a user specialist. However, once the staff target is promulgated, the process is elevated to project status, a code name is allocated to the project, and the user specialist, not necessarily the same individual, could become the project officer. Alternatively, an alternative individual will be appointed as the project officer.
Thank you, Colonel. You may proceed to refer to the relevant extracts of the URS.
I refer to page 18 of the bundle. And as I mentioned, I didn't think that all the issues there were relevant. However, in a contracting model, it would be considered completely differently, because if things are not included in the contract, you're definitely not going to get what you think you're going to get. I'd like to go to paragraph 27, survival requirements, and just mention a few of the issues that were considered during the project phase because they were contained in the URS. The airframe we deemed had to be crash-worthy to an extent that having hit the ground at considerable speed, there would be no loss of life and limited injury to the crew or inhabitants of the aircraft. This was one of the deliverables. It was done thoroughly and was eventually certified by the civil authority that it complied to the specifications. In order to ensure that the aircrew survived, special crash-worthy seats were developed in accordance with the URS. This just mentions that there shall be this capability. The specifications are taken, and once the URS has been approved, then the arms corps process takes over, and that is the requirement is converted into a specification. And these specifications are given to the contractor, and he will then satisfy the requirement in accordance with these specifications. And another requirement that we deemed necessary, being a military helicopter, we required self-sealing tanks. This entails that should a projectile penetrate the tank and the size of the projectile up to and including the 7.62 millimeter round, the tank would seal itself completely and you would be able to continue without any spillage of your fuel. So those are just some of the safety issues that were looked at. If we can go to paragraph 28, transportability. The product shall be capable of being the same page, page 19, Chair. Page 19, URS 28. Thank you. Mr. Chair, the transportability entails that whatever product is procured shall be transportable in the C-130 Hercules, which is our stalwart transport aircraft in the South African Air Force. And this is possible. If we go to URS 32.1 in the design philosophy, a very fancy word for an autopilot is the automatic flight control system, and in order to reduce the workload of the pilot, this was deemed necessary so that he could operate in a single pilot environment in all weather conditions, both day and night. And this capability was delivered. URS 33, navigation system. An integrated navigation system was specified and delivered. It has global positioning inputs into the nav system, which is validated by a Doppler system. A Doppler system is a pulse beam that is beamed from the antenna to the ground and received back, and the difference in the transmitted and received beam gives an indication of the mobility of the unit. And using those two in conjunction gives the helicopter a very accurate positioning capability. In order to simplify, as I mentioned earlier, the private hard copy of the map, there's electronic digital map in the aircraft. This can be scaled to various scales depending on type of operation. Obviously, staying on page 19, URS 31, correction 34.1, correction 34, communications on board, and 34.1 specifies that it has very high, ultra high, high frequency radio with the frequency modulation to the band. Still on page 19, URS 39, forward looking infrared capability. This is the role of mission capability that not always only used for specific mission. Some of the missions that we have successfully carried out is using this to be able to detect the temperature difference between human or animal and the environment. And it has been extremely successful. Still on page 19, URS 40, self-protection machine gun. This requirement has always been
specification to define the requirement in more detail, and we see later that this capability still being evaluated. There have been installations that have been bought, qualified, and they are using weapons from the inventory of the vehicle, and they will be cleared for self-protection. Still on page 19, Yaris 43.1.1, flotation system. This is so that the helicopter can be used as maritime environment. We see later that this activity is still outstanding, even though the flotation ban has been lifted. Turn to page 20. Yaris 43.1.2, cargo sling. The cargo sling should be capable of lifting weight of at least 600 kilograms. There should also be a hoist capable of lifting 270 kilograms. The difference between the two, the cargo sling is the capability that cable hooks to the bottom of the helicopter, and attached to that is your cargo. So you would go into the hopper, hook up the cargo, and at reduced speed be able to move it from point A to point B. The hoist is different. It's similar to the winch that is fitted on bumpers, 4x4, off-road vehicles in Toronto, and that should be capable of lifting 270 kilograms. The reason for this specification is that if you're lifting two persons out of the water with full clothing on, this will possibly be close to the maximum weight. On page 20, Yaris 43.1.3. The LUH shall be capable of carrying medical stretchers. It must be able to accommodate two of these stretchers, and they should be the ones currently used in field. One. Something else that was required was the OEM stretcher interface, which is used for emergency medical evacuation in a civil environment, which makes it very compatible for us to operate with the civil ambulance services, so that the stretchers between us and them are not different. Still on page 20, Yaris 44, personnel and training. The initial training courses that were done by the project conjunction with the OEM was we did 2 courses for 4 pilots each, and we did 2 courses for 8 technicians. So that was the core training capability of the airport, and most of the students for those courses were instructors themselves, so they would train the rest of the members that were going to February 9. This is subsequently changed, and there is dedicated training facility co-located helicopter flying school in Bloemfontein, and all the training is done in this subunit. Still on page 20, Yaris 44.2.6, training aid. Training aid work really specified training aid requirement eventually concluded, and it should have computer-based training capability for both in and ground. And initially in the contract, a full mission simulator was included. However, with the budget constraints, this was removed and supplemented with cockpit procedural training with the training training. As I mentioned earlier, the cockpit procedural trainer has very good visual, also very good visual database, should I say, with very good resolution. And it's so much so that most of the training is carried out. Turn the page, page 21. URS 45. Page 21.
Colonel? Yeah. 45. So I will ask for the indulgence for the amendment of that number 54 to read 45. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
But there's 45 on page 20. 20, there's 45. URS 45 on page 20 at the bottom.
Page 21. Sorry about that, my apologies.
Mr. Chair, I continue page 21. And now that we've resolved the dyslexic 45 and 54, we continue to URS 45. Logistics URS. This was drawn up by using the methodology of a logistics support analysis, and the outcome of this was, as mentioned in URS 48, an integrated logistics support system was delivered. URS 54, technical data and documentation. This was delivered in electronic format and is updated regularly. URS 55, infrastructure and facilities. Considering that the LUH was being deployed to units where the Alouette previously served, there was no necessity for major infrastructure development. So what happened was only the LUH specific requirements were addressed by the project, and these are in the process of being completed at the moment. URS 58, ground support and test equipment. This was all delivered and is in inventory. URS 63, preparation for delivery. I'd like to expand on this a little bit, if I may, Mr. Chair. This activity has been completed for all the equipment contained in the original acquisition plan. That has been handed over and formally accepted by the Director Helicopter Systems. However, some of the additional requirements identified during the operational test and evaluation phase still need to undergo OT&E, and some of them are currently undergoing OT&E. I can mention these 5 outstanding activities. The first one we did mention earlier was the self-protection 7.62 weapons, the secure communications suite, operations with the infrared observation system when it is slaved to the searchlight. At the moment, both systems can be used individually, but not slaved. And this is in the process of being evaluated. It makes it so much easier if the two can be co-located rather than have to manipulate each one individually. The night vision capability of the LUH was evaluated under the operational test and evaluation. However, there is a slight disagreement on the standard operating procedures, and we have appointed the most experienced night vision goggle pilot who is qualified on the 109 to revalidate that report and to make recommendations on the NVG SOPs that will be promulgated by Director Helicopters possibly in the next 2 months. Then the last activity that is outstanding is the shipborne clearances, and this has taken far too long, and we have been in discussions with the Navy, and hopefully that this activity will be completed before the end of the calendar year. Mr. Chair, that's all I have on the URS.
Thank you, Colonel. Shall you then revert to page 3 of the bundle? Still on paragraph 7, you mention that soon after the ROC was approved, you commenced to draft the staff target, and the staff target was then approved by the Armaments Acquisition Board on the 16th day of May 1996. Mr. Chair, the staff target document is contained, as I have stated, in pages 92 to 105 of the bundle. Will you please explain as to what would be contained in the staff target, and you are also at liberty to refer to the various extracts of the staff target which are contained in page 120 of the bundle. That page appears as the last page because it was a late consideration edition, so it is not in line with the rest of the document. It is disjointed from the rest of the document. You may proceed, Colonel.
Mr. Chair, on page 93 of the bundle, you'll see it's the submission regarding the South African Air Force Staff Target 3 of 95, Project Flange, the Alouette 3 replacement. As I mentioned earlier, all the technical information contained in this document stems from either your URS or from your required operational capability. The differences, as I mentioned in this document, is that budgets are referred to, estimated budgets I should emphasize, and that budgetary cash flows are identified and timescales are identified. Apart from that, everything else that's in the URS will be contained in the staff target. So I'm not sure if there's anything specific that we need to go through in the actual document. If we go to page 98, there you can see the budgetary estimates for the various activities. And as we can see that here they are still referring to the 60 that were contained in the study done by the Air Force, as well as the, no, in fact, at this stage, the defense review didn't exist. So it was obviously based on the findings of the project study, the 60 aircraft that was approved. And then just below that, you can see the in-year estimated cash flow. And that gives the planning department an indication of how to position the budgets. If you look at infrastructure and manpower on page 99, I mentioned that this capability, or this capability is replacing the Alouette 3. And that's why when they talk about infrastructure and manpower, they will be making use of both of these that were there to support the Alouette, with minor changes for the specific product. And then on page 100 is the approval, and it is for the staff target to replace the Alouette 3, continuation of the acquisition process until up to the submission of the staff requirement. It gives a ceiling baseline and authority to spend a certain amount of money on the drafting or reaching finalization on drafting of the staff requirement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right, thank you, Colonel. After the approval of the staff target by the Armaments Acquisition Board on the 16th day of May 1996, the project flange was then registered.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned earlier, up until then, there was an Alouette 3 replacement program staffed by a user specialist officer. With the approval, a project officer is appointed and the program is registered with a code name as a project. In this case, it was registered as Project Flange.
Right. Thank you, Colonel. Before we proceed to deal with paragraph 8, I'd like to mention that the paragraph is quite involved, Chair, and there is no possibility that we can finalize the paragraph, the contents of that paragraph today. And I would request that we adjourn as it is now 4 o'clock.
We'll adjourn until tomorrow morning. Thank you.
All rise.
Good. Thank you. Dr. Madima.
Of us having considered the option, the pros and cons and challenges that we had, and this debate took place at that Armaments Acquisition Council, and that is chaired by the Minister of Defence. As you've heard, it's the highest council. And when that reply came back to the Air Force, that the decision was that we were going to remain with the three-tier system, that is when I was called in to say that I would be the project officer of Project Winchester, which was the registered project then for the leading fighter trainer. I hope that has answered your question. Thank you. No, the Air Force would not have made that decision. It would have been made by the Armaments Acquisition Council in terms of the decision. The carrying in of the need to stay with the three-tier system was carried in by the Air Force, and at that point it would have been the Chief of the Air Force who attends meetings at that level. And the debate, I can only imagine, was taken there with all of the senior members, and then the decision that came back I can confirm the decision that came back because I was then called in and told. The decision is the Air Force is staying with the three-tier system, and I then became the project officer of Project Winchester at that point of time. And I think I have alluded largely to the fact that you will only move off that three-tier system if you are sure, in my opinion, and that would have been my considered opinion at the time and now, and that is that you would only do that if you could transit in the two-tier safely and adequately from a military training point of view. Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Madima, maybe before we move from this point, just from my own understanding, supposed to carry any weapons.
That is correct, sir.
Two, am I correct to say from what you have said up to now, it appears as if the South African Air Force recommended the three-tier training system and the decision was ultimately made somewhere else, and we are not part of that group of people who made that decision?
No, sir, that was made at the highest. I've attended that meeting. I was only part of the options as part of the study, the work group and work study group, of which was large, that debated and looked at the two options of two-tier or three-tier, either retaining our three-tier we had all the time or looking again to possibly move to a two-tier if we could.
South African Air Force recommended? Or is it one of the training systems that the South African Air Force said that it is one of the options that they can look at?
Then, due to cost, the option of changing to a two-tier system was investigated and compared to the advantages, disadvantages, risks involved, and then took cognizance of the RFI feedback from the project team that had been out on the AFT program at that point in time, and some of the feedback on the other information, and then the Chief of the Air Force carried that debate into the Armaments Acquisition Council, where it was tabled by the Chief of the Air Force for discussion and decision, and the decision made. That is how I understand it, sir. Yes. Always had that. Thank you.
In favor of the two-tier system, knowing the history of the system that obtained at the SAAF.
As I said, because I was not part of in the AAC, it was way above my level at that point. So I can only believe then that this would not have been a decision taken lightly. It would have been debated by a higher level than just the Air Force as well, and discussed and how can I say, considered before the final decision was taken then at the AAC. But I cannot comment. I was not present at any of those sessions or meetings, so I cannot confirm that part of it. I can confirm that the Air Force always has had a three-tier system. Cost constraints led us to have to look at not only that two system, I mentioned the other options we looked at upgrading, training elsewhere. This was all part of the debate within the Air Force. I imagine there were also other debates that happened about these matters in other forums of the DoD and the system at the time. But the decision-making board or council, as I understood it at the time, would have been correctly the AAC, which was the highest forum authority at the time of these matters. But I cannot confirm, the statement as such, because I was not there or present at the time. Thank you, Chair. I keep saying there were options that were being deliberated, the option to go to the two-tier from a traditional three-tier. system. So the thought was it could possibly be done. So information was gathered, deliberations done, workshops held, goes to the Air Force Board, goes up for a decision. That's how I understood the process to happen at the time.
The important difference, however, was that the middle tire would no longer be made up of a plane that could both fight and train. Instead, it would be a plane that could only train pilots to graduate to the final tire. This, of course, meant that the Hawk, which was only used for training, could not fight in combat situations, could now be reconsidered. Any comments?
Chair, as I said, I would prefer not to comment on the view of that quote as such in terms, as you said. I can only go with process and with what happened in terms of the debate, and then it was at higher forums. So I certainly cannot comment on the feedback and decisions taken at boards where I was not present at the time. I can, however, confirm again that the RFIs that were sent out at that point in time was for the advanced light fighter aircraft, which, remember, at that point in time had been changed then from the aft. So I'm not sure, but I see again, which I alluded to, that many people confuse the advanced fighter trainer, which would have been the light fighter, and the trainer for the future medium fighter. The future medium fighter had then been terminated or cancelled because, again, of cost, and the Air Force's frontline fighter would now be an advanced light fighter. This aircraft, again, I say, due to modern technology in aircraft, and Air Force will always look at the most cost-effective way of doing the task. And so it would have looked at, and it did look at, the possibility of then having a two-tier system, because it would have meant you would not need to have another aircraft system. We had already, however, committed to the Astra. Had at that point in time, for example, possibly the Astra not yet been replaced by the Harvard, then a different aircraft might have been chosen. Decided that we would scale down to a single squadron, being 2 squadron at Air Force Base Makado in our case, and all the aircraft would go to that squadron. Ideally, you would want to have 2 squadrons, ideally, due to factors that of competition, of competition, and 16 aircraft as well. You would generally then want 16 pilots. However, if you only have 1 squadron of aircraft, as we did, the 26, the rationale of the Air Force in around 1999, there was a document written where we stated that we would, although we were getting 1 aircraft, and remember at that point we did not fully comprehend how multi-role and spin-role this aircraft was going to be. We understood it a little bit from the cheetah, but not to that degree. So the rationale was 6 aircraft dedicated for air-to-air defense, 6 aircraft would be dedicated for air-to-surface, and 2 aircraft for reconnaissance, giving you 18 aircraft, which must be available at a peak for operations, and at 65% average serviceability, which was the experience then, that led to the number of 28, which was the Air Force's minimum requirement, below the force design which was required. So in terms of international benchmark then, at that rate of 26 aircraft and then having sort of around 16 is what we were wanting to build up to have a capability had the steady increase in pilots continued. And hence at that stage we have trained around about that number of pilots. If that answers the question, Chair. Perhaps I'm not that familiar with the term value for money. So I would be a bit cautious to answer that question. It's not a term we use in our domain, a value for money term. So, Chair, unfortunately, I'm not that comfortable to comment on that. I'm unsure of the term. We use the word cost effective. That means not necessarily, least or more, but relative to the cost that you expend or utilize, you must get the most involved, because we are actually in the department or in the government, we are in a game of cost within budget, and you cost as much as possible. So we are very focused then on cost. In my view, the cost effectiveness over 40 or 50 years, when considered, is then estimated in the beginning. It's continually updated along the way, and then the measurement of cost effectiveness. The difficulty with this is always, one finds that unless you've actually operated the aircraft in your environment, what I can say is that today we know what the systems cost us, particularly the Hawk at the moment versus the Gripen. And what I can say is we are operating these two aircraft today within the cost estimates for the two systems in terms of flying cost per hour and in terms of operating them, as was predicted at the time of the decisions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, General. The last paragraph, right?
Are you referring now on the Alpha or the Lift, or the Gripen or the Hawk side? Chair, sorry, if I may ask, sorry, through the Chair, if I may ask. Chair, all I want to say is that the task of the project team, as directed and guided by the Air Force Command Council and the project board, was to ensure that whatever aircraft was put through the process of the request for offer and tabled in the case of the strategic defense packages to the Strategic Office Committee, which is where our role ended, was to ensure that all of those aircraft would meet the requirements of the Air Force. Then there were matters that I've alluded to, such as, in our case, our military value, we evaluated. The risk was evaluated. And then the analysis was given. And on all those aircraft, that would have been done, tabled at the Strategic Office Committee by, in this case, the team led by the Arms Corps Program Manager, and then taken through what I understood, in my view, a strategic decision-making process to the highest level of government, where many other factors, I would imagine, I don't know, I was not part of that, but I would imagine that these were strategic defense packages, and the final decision then lay with the government. And between us tabling that in that July, where all these factors and evaluations were put through on the technical, and all I know is that we presented the technical, the other departments presented their part, and from there on with the Strategic Office Committee, we then waited for the final decision in November, when we heard what that aircraft was. We were not in any way party to either the other departmental submissions, nor to the strategic process, if I may say, at that point in time, that took place from there. Thank you, Chair. I can definitely say it was either in the delivery of the first Astra, if I am correct, sir, and I will come back, I will submit however I need to do it via the evidence leaders. We will, as the Air Force, submit the exact dates like we did for Hawk and Gripen of the delivery. I think we should submit, if you accept that, Chair, the delivery schedule dates for the 60 aircraft. From what month and year to what. I am fairly, as far as I know, definitely mid-90s. Were the start of the deliveries, but we will get the actual dates of the deliveries.
At the time of the SDPP, how many of these were there, the Astras?
Began and ended in terms of that part of the process. But I am sure when we get the dates that certainly some of the Astras would already have been delivered to the Air Force by the time the first government proposals came in. And I think, I'm not sure, but when the first government made the proposal of a package to our government, which I read and understand to have been around 1996, I am fairly confident we'd already received our first Astras. But Commissioner, that will be in the submission that we give on the exact dates. And we will say how many, what we can include in there is how many of the Astras had been delivered, say in 1996 and through to the end delivery date. Commissioner, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm interested at that time. You don't have an idea of how many of these Astras were there at that time?
If it is possible, the days on which the process to acquire those Astras started.
Of 60 helicopters was included. And this stemmed from the study that was carried out in 1992, where we determined in order to satisfy an Alouette replacement, a quantity of 60 units would be required. Having this figure, we were requested and tasked to draft up a request for offer, and we were instructed to include the NIP and the DIP information, and we were only to send to the 3 finalists that I mentioned earlier.
Right, thank you. Then in November 1998, the Cabinet announced that Augusta Company had been selected as a preferred supplier for the Alouette. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Then the...
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Now, subsequent to the conclusion of the contract, you were then relocated to the Augusta helicopter facility in Italy in May 2000, where you served as the project officer until December 2003.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Project was then terminated and you were then recalled to South Africa.
So the original acquisition plan contents have been concluded. So that would have been phase 1 of the project was concluded. So I think one should not look at it as the program just dragging on. There were certain phases that were concluded and the system has been handed over to the Air Force. However, the delta or additional requirements are in the process of being resolved at this stage.
Now, you do indicate in...
Procedural trainer. It has, however, got a very good visual database, and the visuals are so good that introduction and continuation training for night vision goggle operations can be carried out on the procedure trainer. I think that sums it up, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Colonel. Now I'd like to...
Mr. Chair, not being an engineer, I wasn't able to contribute towards the engineering discipline per se. However, my task was to ensure that I managed all these processes and different disciplines to ensure that we all arrived on the assembly line in time to start the production. Mr. Chair, the Alouette 3 was designed by the French company called Sud Aviation, now known as Eurocopter. And it was designed in the late 50s, and the South African Air Force acquired their first Alouette 3 in 1962. So by the time I started the investigation into the possibility of upgrading or replacing the Alouette 3, they had already been in service for about 30 years. And as a previous colleague alluded to, the acquisition cycle from the first drafting of one of the documents, namely the required operational capability, until the product is brought into service, could be anything from 10 to 15 years. So we realized that we had to work in all earnest to make sure that the Alouette 3 process commenced timeously, so that we did not run into a problem by not having a light helicopter capability in the Air Force. One of the other issues that was looked at was, at the time, it was indicated that Aerospati or Sud Aviation, or Aerospatiale as they later became, were intending to close down the Alouette 3 production line. And this would have complicated our support lines. It would have led to long lead times and possibly extra costs. And maybe one of the options to have resolved that would have been to have bought out large quantities of spares, which the Defence Force couldn't actually afford at that stage, because if you remember, 1990 was when we underwent one of the first major financial cutbacks. So we didn't have the money or the luxury to invest in this capability. So we had to carry out the study to see whether it could be upgraded, and if not, then it had to be replaced.
Right. Thank you, Colonel.
Can you just clarify the issue of these ROIFACs? Are they getting deployed in the DRC? And if so, just tell us a bit more about that.
Well, the issue of ROIFAC, if it has been a request from the United Nations, remember the United Nations is just an organization. And therefore, if it requests that, it should request it from the government of the Republic of South Africa, not necessarily the South African National Defence Force. And then arrangements should be made between the United Nations organization and the government of the Republic of South Africa. That by itself is just a process which does not take a very short time. It's a cumbersome process that should be followed before the request is submitted to the South African National Defence Force for implementation. And even then, there are a number of processes that should still be followed before any equipment, be it equipment or personnel, are deployed or are given over to the United Nations for further employment.
So now, as the SANDF, has that request been submitted to you already? Are you aware of that request?
We are aware of that request as the South African National Defence Force, as well as the processes that are currently underway in terms of making that equipment available to the United Nations, as well as the United Nations is aware of the processes that are going on between the United Nations and the South African National Defence Force, that is the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations. The only thing that we may not be comfortable with, it is as if the processes have been completed, as it may emerge from the media as well as from the other people from the mission area being quoted as UN officials. UN officials are aware of all the processes that should be followed before a country, which is called a troop contributing country, contributes those troops to the United Nations and their equipment.
So what are we likely to see happening in the next few days, or how soon or how late can we see the deployment of this aircraft?
Well, it's not a question that we, as the South African National Defence Force, may be able to give timelines in it. It depends on the conclusion and finalization of all the processes between the United Nations and the government entities involved in that.
Or will this be what, the Department of Defense and International Relations?
The Department of Defense and Department of International Relations as well.
Okay, all right. But in the request, did they say how many aircraft? Is it one aircraft? How many do we know?
I don't know, and some of the information therefore that we may also not disclose because it has got some confidentiality. You know, revealing, that's one thing that I would like also to mention. You know, revealing, if you are in conflict as a military component, you don't expose or reveal the capabilities that you are going with to war. Otherwise, it is as if you are telling the person that you are fighting with to say, listen, this is what I'm going to fight you with, and this is how I'm going to fight you. So it defeats the principle of surprise, which is the principle of war.
Wow.
Two that I alluded to earlier. In the white paper on defense, the military is required to assist the South African police services.
Sorry about that. Yes, you may proceed, Colonel. Indicate that the Colonel, the paragraph that he was referring to is in page 18 of the bundle.
Till you were ready, may I continue, sir? Thank you. I read para 8.2 of the user requirement, which says, in the white paper on defense, the military is required to assist the South African police services in certain of their tasks, such as border patrol, combating drug trafficking, cattle rustling, stock theft, and the detection of illegal immigrants. The possibility of selecting equipment that could satisfy national requirements should be strived for. I stay on page 18 and I go to para 9.1.